Welcome to Factorio Space Age. My name is Nilaus and we are starting up a new series. We're going to be diving into the Factorio Masterclass for Space Age. And what better place to start than to start with the old and omnipresent and ubiquitous city block. This is something that I invented back in 2016 and have been seeking its way into a lot of designs and bases over the years. And I know that when I say city blocks, then I can hear it already, I immediately whip up the Factorio subreddit into a blood-fueled frenzy that will argue that it's inefficient, it's wasteful, it's just a brace the spaghetti, and it's boring, and it's destroying the game. And, I don't care. This is the way I like it. I like having an orderly view, and neat lines, and structured bases. So that's why I use city blocks. Also, I use the main boss very often, but I really like the idea of city blocks. And it's been serving me faithfully for almost 9 years now. And, well, I'm going to be, in this video, I'm going to be showing you, talking about the benefits, the purpose of city blocks, why they're good, why they're a great way to structure the base, why they need to be updated. It's been 9 years. And why how that fits in with Space Age. I'm also going to provide you with blueprints on how to set it up. I'm going to be showing you some early game, mid game, late game things, because the structure and design principles are different in Space Age. So what you're seeing here is the base before Space Age, before we just launched the first rocket. And you can see this is the old-fashioned, good old city block build with the 100 by 100 tiled city blocks. And that is what I want to change and challenge to come up with a different way. So if you find that interesting and you want to support the channel, then hit the like button, let me know in the comment section below. Also, I'm going to be providing the blueprints. They are being provided to patron supporters. This is a way for me to give something back to the people who are supporting the channel and the work I do here. So I'll be providing a nice blueprint book to get started, and that's how I'm going to do for these master classes moving forward. All right, so let's dive in. So I loaded up an older save, and this is of course before Space Age, but it illustrates the purpose of the city blocks. And the idea is it is easy to replicate because you now have a structure. If we just look at the superimposed, everything here is built within the city block design, and then there are some designs here. This is of course a mega base, so it is much bigger than what it is. But each of these, you can see here, each of these are sort of following the city block design. And then it's replicated. This is the structure of it. This is the advantage of it, is that you build something once, and then if you want more of it, well, here we have a city block design size for green circuits, and if I want more of those, then I can just replicate it again and again and again and again. And that's what I really like. Also, the other advantage is that it has like a clear way of interacting with the rest of the world. It is a service-oriented architecture. So that means that it has like an API, which could be trains or it could be robots, but it does sort of have a purpose. This one is making green circuits. It has some inputs defined and it has some outputs defined. It doesn't do a million things. It does one thing, and that means it's much easier to structure and organize. So that's how it served us in the past. What you can also see is this base, and this also shows you some of the things that doesn't work or that has changed radically for Space Age. This is a 10,000 signs per minute as a base, which was impressive before, but a 10,000 signs per minute base in Space Age looks 100th of this. So there is a need for change. But at least we now understand what the objective is. It's the fact that it is service-oriented, it has a clear purpose, it has clearly defined inputs and outputs, and therefore you can build it once, design it once, and then replicate it multiple times. Let's take a look at what Space Age has changed into. For now, here on Space Age base, I am still using the city block design, and if we scroll out, yes, we still use the city block design because that's how I build it and that's how it has structured. It serves me really well. There's some disadvantages here. This has of course not been updated very much since the beginning. Since we actually launched the first rocket, and that also just kind of clearly indicates that what I left as this much space for designs for green circuits and red circuits, it's completely irrelevant now, because that's not how we do green circuits, red circuits in bulk anymore. And therefore, leaving so much space is just really impractical. And it's one of the key points about it is that each city block is, it has some distinct disadvantages. One of them is that you reserve a lot of space. That means in the beginning, you actually sort of, when you build like here, you have to build a bus and it's really big, and then you have to build the smelting columns first, and then you have to build the hub, and you have to build the green circuits, and then they're just really far apart. So you need a lot of belts and a lot of space before you can even get started on the bus base. That's a little bit of a problem. It's something that the argument was that you're going to need it later on, so build it with a lot of space in the beginning. But we don't need that much space. The second disadvantage is exactly what you see here. Since I want to have a consistent blueprint grid or a consistent roboport coverage of all my base, that's how I always want it. That's how I never want to do it any different. That means when we look at the standard city block, it has this structure here. That means there's a lot of space like out here that's kind of wasted because it just is a little bit difficult to work around the roboports. And then you kind of have to end up with a design like this where you just stamp down some random roboports. What I've done then, because I could see that this was too big to build on the other planets, then we can look at Volcanus, for example. You can see it's one giant roboport network. I want to do it this way. I don't see a reason why not. You have lots of robots. They're very fast. They work quite well. Of course, there are some methods here that could be optimized, but generally it works. Now, what I've done on Volcanus to begin with was just set a substation grid, and then once you set the substation grid, it's really difficult to change it because even though I have legendary substations, changing every single one of these to legendary substations is just an ungodly task because it's kind of built here. So now I have two different options. I have the old city blocks on the Novice that are too big, and then I have the small little substation grids here that are honestly a little bit too constrictive. No, they're way too constrictive. So what to do? Because I also want to make sure that I still retain this design. So those are the conditions. Also, another thing that we can look at is that with Space Age, you really have a completely different perspective on building it. This is 940 steel per second. So 940 steel per second is this teeny amount of space. So you don't really need that much space anymore. So mindset is we're going to keep the good things about the city blocks, the roboport coverage, the structure, the modularity, the service-oriented architecture, but we want to make it smaller, yet not this small. So what's it going to be like? Well, the thing is, the city blocks actually have a structure here with the roboports. So what if we made the roboports the corners instead of sort of making them in the middle? That would be like a great starting point. And that's what I've been doing out here, transitioning to a new grid, where I'm now building the roboports on the corners, and then the city block becomes much smaller. It becomes half size. So now instead of being 100 by 100, it is 50 by 50. Or if you look at it on the inside, inside this area, it's 46 by 46, which doesn't look like much. But as I was saying, if I can make something like this, which is 940 steel in this much space, then I really don't think I need that much bigger city blocks. This also gives us an advantage in the beginning because we can then take a look at we don't need to reserve as much space. So instead of, for example, this would be smelting, the hub and green circuits, and then the bus here in the middle, which be like much smaller compared to the existing one, which would be, well, 4 times as big because it's this kind of size here. So really good advantages here. What I want to do then is then I started working on it and just go like, okay, well, what's it going to look like? The very basic part is that it's going to be the actual city block is going to look like this, 50 by 50, and I'm just making it with stone bricks all the way around. Then I've been looking at, okay, well, what are we going to do about power poles? So I just built this one because you have substations by the time you have roboports. And well, this has both advantages and disadvantages. It covers everything in power. It is tileable, but it also just has the disadvantage of just filling it up with substations that you really don't need everywhere. So what I've decided is that I'm not actually going to be pushing very heavily for how to do power poles, because previously there were only a few different power poles. There were the small power poles, the medium, the large, and the substations. But now there are different rarity of each of these, and you may use I don't know, rare quality small power poles, while someone else really likes the uncommon quality substations and whatever else. So I don't think I can come up with a way that will be perfect for everyone. For the late game, I'm going to do this one where I put the substations here, that means my blueprints will not include the power poles to feed this, because that's up to you. But there are certainly different ways. This is a substation grid. I've also looked at some the very basic stuff, like here. This is if you don't have that, when you use medium tower poles. So let's look at some of the early game designs that you can come up with. So we now have the basic structure of the city block. We have the city block without anything, we have the city block with the roboports, and we have an example with city block with some substations. Let's look at some of the things that we can put inside the city block, sort of in the context of, well, it has a different size than usual, so it will also be able to fit things that in a different way. Now, in a original city block, or the old school, the 1.0 city block, you can actually have a full lane here, but there's still a lot of wasted space. And that means this is going to be if it's yellow, then it's on normal stone furnaces, then it's a full yellow belt in. And that means we can have 8 full lanes in. And when you change to red belts and steel furnaces, it's also 8 red belts in and 8 red belts out from one city block. But when you take it 1/4 of the size, well, not surprisingly, it's also only going to be 1/4 of the content. But I think that's a very advantageous, because this is early game and you really don't have a possibility to do more than what you have here. That you have, okay, you have 2 full lanes or 2 yellow lanes in. That's very much what you could expect. That would be 60 miners in the very early game, and that's definitely probably what you can expect to get in the beginning. So that will feed in here and then make a nice little design. It comes out as 2 full lanes, yellow lanes. When we upgrade again for red belts and steel furnaces, it doubles up, then it becomes 2 times red belts. I am super happy about that. I think that's it was one of those things that was like, oh man, can I fit this in, and does it make sense? And yes, I can fit it in, and yes, it does make sense, and I'm really happy about the design. There's also room for a splitter before and a splitter after, or a balancer before and after. Other things that sort of take up space in the early game is, well, power. This power is using 13.5 coal per second, so that means it is pretty close to using a full belt here, and then it produces 54 megawatt of power, so that is also really good. With the water, you just feed the water in one place or the other, and then it goes in. So again, very easy to make a dedicated city block for power. That's also really good. Other things that would be advantageous in the beginning, or good in the beginning, is, well, what would the bus setup look like now that we have fewer lanes? And I've been sort of going through it and kind of balancing it and looking at what I need and what I'm doing. And then I would say just try to feed in up to 8 red belts of copper and 8 red belts of iron. Most of the not red belts, but whatever belts you have, then whatever copper you have will be transformed mainly into greens. So for example, these 6 lanes would turn into those 4 green lanes, together with some of the 4 of the iron as well. But the iron would go into a hub, and then I've just made this transition saying, after it gets depleted, then here this gets depleted and turns into green, this gets depleted and turns into the red and blue. That just means that what is going to be on the same line, the coal is only going to be used for 2 things. It's going to be used for plastic, and then it's going to be used for the military science. So that means by the time I use the last bit for military science, that's also when I can then take this out if I want to put that out on a perimeter defense. Likewise, for the space platform builds, they also need some kind of transport into the rocket. And then I'm also sort of transitioning the iron that we use mainly for the hub, and all the belts and inserters and all that stuff we need, well, transition that and then make it into the stuff that you need a little bit later on in the. Yeah, so that would be like a bus setup, a suggestion for a bus setup. Maybe you want it different, but this is kind of how I see it, and I think that makes quite a lot of sense, honestly. Other things that we could do is, let's see, I thought there was one more. Yes, there was. A block 4 here for solar power. Yes, this is not the perfect utilization, but I really like this pattern here. It has this this rotational symmetry without having an unfortunate rotational symmetry, and it's pretty close to a good ratio. You can always just fit in more if you like, but honestly, in this case, I really like this design. So that's also somehow what I want to do. It's neat to just say, okay, I need some places for city blocks to do that. This is what I'm doing here. I'm also just accepting a lot of wasted space here, but just the convenience of just being able to stamp down this pretty quickly is, well, really convenient. So stamp it down. It's pretty good ratio. Then we can move on. So that's the early game. Well, what happens to the mid game? Well, mid game, that's where you start working with trains. So how does this smaller city block work with trains? Fortunately, it does. So I've also provided some basic train blueprints so you can see that. Basically, I'm just looking at a 2-lane system. I am not using elevator rails because I really don't see a lot of value in the in the rails. I use them, of course, I use them where I need them on Volcanus, on Fogora, and on Aquilo. Aquilo is the train planet, but not really on Novice, only to go over cliffs. But that means we just build it like this. And here is another design for the straight rail, and here is the T intersection. And here is a suggestion for an unloading or loading station where it just branches off from here, branches off, goes in 1-4 trains. All this is designed for 1-4 trains. Why? 2 reasons. 1-4 trains, 3 reasons, many reasons. 1-4 trains, they fit quite well so that you can have like these signals, and when you make another block next to it, let's see, let's do that. And that one. Then between these two, there is actually room for a 1-4 train, and that's perfectly nice. So here, there's room for it in the city block. This fits quite well. It also means that you can use 2 city blocks for a train station. It unloads a little bit here, and then goes around. These larger curves are a little bit problematic. Then you might be like, hey, where's the 4-way intersection? And then, haha, there is no 4-way intersection, because you should never use 4-way intersections or roundabouts. You should use 3-way intersections and then just work your way around it, because 4-way intersections, they are always the cause of your jams, and roundabouts even more so. So I never use anything more than T intersections. That means you only need the corner, the straight, the T intersection, and an intersection for a station. You can of course make this bigger if you want to have more, but if you want to sort of have this should be limited to 1, so that you don't have someone parked out here on the main line. But if you want more, then you can definitely just make it bigger. So those are basically the train inputs. They are also part of the blueprint here. You can see it here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they are of course made so that they rotate nicely inside of a city block level. And yeah, so that's that. I think that's really convenient, and that's now also for the mid game. Other things for sort of the mid game. When I talk about mid game, then I talk about before you actually leave mid game or novice. So it's like the early game before you get your base established, the mid game where you start sort of expanding and building stuff out. But then you might also want some nuclear power, and I was just looking at nuclear power, and I was sure that it would be possible to fit in 4 reactors and everything needed, but I just couldn't get it done. So I asked the moderator team to come up with suggestions. So this is designed by Jeffers, and it is a really cool design that takes a 4 reactor setup here. It also controls the inputs and outputs of this, so it only inserts when it needs fuel. And that is fitting exactly into one of the new city blocks. So yet another check mark on this is kind of awesome. You really don't need more power than this before you go to space. And since you don't really want your novice base to be particularly big, maybe until the very late game, then I think that in my previous iteration, my first iteration, I built this nuclear power plant, but this is way too big. There is no reason to have it this big for the beginning, and by the time you really need more power, maybe you can stamp down another one, or you can then go and say, all right, this is time for us to get fusion power, which is also something that can easily be done. So that's some of the stuff that is mid-game before you actually leave Novice. And then the last part is, well, what about the very late game? What kind of things could you do if you really want to scale up and do some big builds on Novice, which is something I want to do. So I have designed a few builds here. This is mainly for examples of just showing that how you can combine multiple things into multiple blocks. I just remove the delimitations between the blocks, and then we have a good, what I could call a district. And it comes in here, trains come in. I'm using molten iron and molten copper for inputs, and that's why I'm also using, I can keep using the 1-4 trains, because they are actually working even in the late game when transporting molten iron and copper. Then they can feed quite well, and I don't really need any more. This can get us, like, I don't know, 11,000 per second. So yeah, sure, it's enough. So this is another way of looking at it. So we have a little buffer here. They go in. You can see that we have like intense designs. This little design here, this part is 240 blue signs per second. yes, per second. And that is, the blue science is the one that takes the most space to build. So I wanted to build that so we can say, all right, if I can build this one and fit it in, then it's probably a good idea to, or it is feasible for us to make it in like, for example, a 2x3 city block district here with trains coming in, with buffers and going out again. So I think this is a really neat design. We can also see that I've done the same thing for the green science and also for the red science as well. And they work also quite well. I think I also have some, this part here, this is for science, for oil, which is a silly build, but this is because I want to use these biochambers, and sometimes you get a fun idea, and whether it works or not is a different matter, or whether it's a good idea or not is a different matter, but it's a fun idea. It takes crude in and gets petroleum out. But again, this is like a 1x3. So you can see that even for late game, this design here is actually working quite well. And as long as you can just merge multiple city blocks together to form like a little district, then it also works. And the great thing about this is that we have like the full Roboport coverage. Our Roboports are no longer in the way of the build. And you can, depending on what kind of builds you have or what kind of power poles you have, you can make the power poles like this way around this area. Now, I know that some of you longtime viewers would be like, yes, but you're building on the sacred path. Yes, but with time and innovation comes new things. And one of the things that we are going to be changing is that previously I was driving around in the base quite a lot. That is completely irrelevant at this point because we have a pretty good alternative to driving around. So the whole idea of driving around the base and bumping into power poles is not really feasible anymore. We can also jump over these. If I couldn't jump over them, and yes, I know that's only later on, then it would also be a little bit annoying because you kind of have to walk around it every time you walk somewhere. But now that we actually have this, then I think that it's worth defining it for the most ideal cases. Then let's also say that, well, this is on Nauvis. What about the other planets? Well, I would also say that on Vulcanus, I would actually adopt this kind of build as well, because if I look at many of my builds here on Nauvis, it could very easily be transformed into a new city block. And this might be like 4 city blocks or something like that, where you have like the processing in one, and then some smelting, and then maybe 2 blocks just dedicated to launching or something like that. It's definitely something that would fit, and then would mean that moving forward we can actually make designs fitting into a city block, and that's going to be our design parameters moving forward. For the first playthrough of Factorio or Space Age, I have been designing everything here not like this one, exactly not like this, but everything, single one of these designs is designed within the substation grid, and it's not great. So moving forward for masterclasses, my grids will be, I'll make designs that fit within a city block in the widest possible extent, and then maybe sometimes I'll make it into multiple. But definitely I want to sort of consider it within a city block with inputs and outputs as well. And that means that you can design it, and if you use this city block, even if you don't use it, then you can still sort of have like, it'll be sort of a square build that will fit into to these kind of things. So I hope that you found this useful. I hope that this can help with a little bit of inspiration for how we're going to do things moving forward. I'm really happy about this design. I've been, as you can see, I have been testing it for a bit just to make sure that we actually have some designs here that make sense. And we are able to sort of handle some of the bigger issues and bigger designs by just sort of collapsing multiple city blocks into a dedicated district. And that's the start of the new design, and it's also why I wanted this part to be the first part of a new masterclass series, so that we can use this as a basis moving forward. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, if you want the blueprints that I've designed here, they are available to Patreon supporters, and of course also all the other designs that you've seen in the base, they are available as part of the blueprint package for the Space Age, so they're also just available to Patreon supporters. So thank you very much everyone who's supporting on Patreon and who's joining the live streams where we do all these designs together, and I will see you guys next episode. Until then, take care and stay effective.